Just said it. Okay, so I do want to start. I was on a conversation last night with some agents, and it did come out kind of that we don't understand why you're doing this, or I don't understand why you're doing this, right? And so I do want to step back just a little bit for anybody that doesn't understand why these changes are being made, right? They're being made somewhat to help the public in the industry, whether or not you believe that or not, but they're coming out of the lawsuit that was filed, the class action lawsuit that came out of Missouri. And it was against the National Association of Realtors, was one of the parties to the lawsuit. They lost in court. The jury came back and said that, yeah, they had violated not being straightforward with compensations being, offered, and not, not protecting the public, colluding, making sure, doing everything together and not being transparent. So out of that, there was going to be somewhere over probably $5 billion, once it was all said and done, or the possibility of that being owed in this class action suit. The minute that the jury came down and said, that we were all guilty of doing all of these terrible things, whether or not we did them or not, multiple lawsuits were being filed, right? So when you start just looking at years and years and years of being in litigation and, having the industry disrupted even more than it already was, and a lot of really wrong and bad press, right? NAR worked towards getting a settlement. Out of the settlement came these requirements, removing compensation from the MLS, and using buyer representation agreements on residential properties. In the meantime, the state of Iowa, the legislature, passed to use buyer representation agreements for all properties that were for sale, not for lease. And that went into effect July 1 of this year. Illinois legislature, they'll also enact by law to use buyer representation agreements, and that'll start January 1 of 2025. We don't know all the language on that, but it does appear like it's going to be even more over, umbrella everything. So for sales, for leases, all property types. So as we usually do in this market, we kind of tend to do things according to the strictest law, right? In your advertising and how you do things. So we're going to have to really watch and see what Illinois comes up with. But right now, July 1, so now all Iowa properties for sale, commercial, residential, multifamily, need to have a buyer representation agreement. Not an exclusive, it's a buyer representation agreement. So it can be exclusive or non-exclusive. And then by August 17th, which is when the NAR settlement requirements come in, you have to be using a buyer representation agreement for residential properties in Illinois. Because you're probably showing someone, possibly, in both states, you're going to need to make sure that you're covering yourself with whatever your company form is. The association does have an exclusive buyer agency agreement. We will not have a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement. We have, just like we have an exclusive right to sell listing contract, we do not have an exclusive agency listing contract. Those are different forms, and so the association is not going to have those. Those are kind of outside of that regular norm. So your brokerages will probably have those if their policy allows you to even do a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement. But that's, company policy. And, a lot of the stuff will be dictated. But so it's certainly not me making you do this, and it's not the local association, but it's really the requirements that have come out of the NAR settlement or state law, right? Okay, so Craig had a question, and we're gonna start with the open house one.
Okay, so somebody walks into an open house. Greg, tell me about this open house.
Yeah, so who are you working for?
Seller.
You're working for the seller, so you do not have to have any kind of buyer representation agreement with those buyers coming in. If at some point that buyer comes up to you and says, I love this house, or I love this house, but do you have other houses you want? That you can show me, I'm not working with anyone, then you start having that buyer consultation with that buyer as a buyer, and you walk out that door and walk back in that door with that buyer as you're representing them. Then you would need the buyer representation agreement.
Dual agency.
Well, and of course, dual agency,
okay.
and you would have to have all of the agency disclosures. None of that has changed,
Okay.
right? Because those are the disclosures, those are agency disclosures that both sides are determining whether or not you can be a dual agent. I've heard a lot of rumblings again about why can't you outlaw dual agency? I can't do that. But what this, is starting to look like is, then everybody's just going to go to a listing agent. They're still going to have to accept dual agency and those restrictions that come with it. So I don't think that's going to happen, but time will tell. But for an open house, you are working for the seller.
I understand your point with that, but to piggyback off that question, if you do not have a listing agreement and you are covering an open house, are you still, I never have had a dual agency agreement if I picked up a buyer from that and actually wrote on it. It's not my listing. I know so you're not implying that dual agency should be signed if you got those buyers from an open house. Correct?
Okay, so now you're talking about a different thing. You're not the listing agent, right?
Right, but I'm hosting an open house.
You're hosting it for someone else in your brokerage.
Yes.
Okay, well, a listing contract and a buyer agreement, they're brokerage agreements,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So that listing contract really covers you also as being an agent of the seller,
Correct.
right?
Mhm.
So, did you do an additional appointed agent, just for our designated agent for that open house? Whether or not you do that or not, you're still working for the seller
Agreed.
in that regard, right? So if you end up having a relationship with that buyer, walk outside and walk back in with them as your client, you're going to need a buyer representation agreement.
Agreed on that. As a dual though, also. That's what I'm confused.
Well,
Yeah.
it would depend on what your brokerage policy
Oh,
is, whether or not, how they're applying dual agency within their brokerage,
Understood.
right?
Yep.
Others?
So you've said a couple times about commercial, ag, et cetera.
Mhm.
Commercials also covered in
In Iowa,
Iowa.
in the NAR settlement, it's only, for Illinois, it's only residential. But I will tell you that Illinois law for January 1 will probably include commercial.
Okay.
So whether or not you just want to start practicing like it's all property types, that might be your best bet, right?
Land's included in that as well, correct?
Now, all property types
What'd you say, huh?
Land.
Yeah.
is included in that.
It
as well?
just says for purchase.
Okay.
for purchase. Yeah, so I had been using when do you need a buyer representation agreement? Is like when you are walking over the threshold with a buyer, having a relationship with that buyer. Or walking over that threshold and, you know, doing a virtual tour for a buyer you have a relationship with. Land would be, there's no threshold, but it's, you know, really having information and that whether or not you're gonna go out and look at the property or not,
Right.
you would still want a buyer representation agreement. Okay. Questions?
Yes,
Do you have a question?
I'm sure I do. So let's go back to, we now have to have an EBA starting July 1st. As far as, can you explain that it's not a bilateral contract, it is a unilateral contract?
Okay, well, the difference between, you know, a listing contract, you know, once you sign that, it would take both parties to cancel that contract or withdraw that contract on our buyer representation agreement. So I'm not talking, your brokerages might be different, or if you're using one from one of the state associations, it gives a notice period so that has your term, but then you have so many days in which either party can give notice to cancel that agreement. So that is a little bit different than, you know, having to have both parties agree. So you can decide whether or not, you know, as that this is your practice or your brokerage practice, that, you know, you set a certain amount, because, you know, you might not want to work with every buyer and your buyers may not want to work with everyone. Craig also had a question about, so you have a buyer call you up and they want to meet at the house and they want to see a property and they want you to open that door. What can you do about that? Because to walk across that threshold, you're going to have a buyer agency agreement. You can limit those agreements down. They can be for a day. They can be per address, just writing in the address on them. You know, these don't have to be long-lived, you know, things. The one thing that you do want to protect yourself, though, is, you know, yes, you may have that. And you're gonna want to, if you just have, you know, you're gonna go see 123 Main Street and you're gonna write, you're only gonna see 123 Main Street, you may want to register, you know, with that listing agent that you saw that property with that buyer. Because then the protection period can go into effect if they sign a buyer's agreement with someone else. You know, it would cancel that out. But, you know, at least if they do go and they, you know, it might be some protection, you know, doing that doesn't give you a lot of protection in that agreement.
Right.
But it's possible to do. I mean, we're all gonna have to work through, or you all are gonna have to work through these. I don't ever have to write one, so.
Can you talk about if, what someone signs one with me and then 2 days later signs one with Kendra?
That's what I was.
That's the
what I was
problem.
gonna ask, yeah.
So of course, whenever you're working with anybody, you know, someone comes in your open house or anything, you ask the question, right? And more you're gonna ask the buyers these questions. Have you signed a exclusive buyer agency agreement? Because you could have a non-exclusive with 100 different agents, and that's why we don't have them. But do you have an exclusive buyer agency agreement? If they lie to you and say no, and sign one with you, then, you know, that one will take effect also. The brokerage then on the first one is going to have to defend their buyer agreement, just like you would have to defend a listing a contract or anything else. And whether or not brokerages will do that, I do not know. We're gonna hope, you know, that our buyers, we have established that relationship. So
Sharon,
Next.
Yeah,
I'm not
hi.
sure how to virtually raise my hand, but
Okay.
would we be able to add a sentence into the EBA, something along the lines of the buyer has attested that they are not in a current EBA with another brokerage, or some type of statement that,
Well,
you know, they have to affirmatively state that they're, as opposed to just verbally saying it.
Well, on the first line of the buyer's duties, it does say that, you're going to have this relationship with the, buyer's agent. So I'm not really sure that if they are going to lie about having one, I'm not sure having an affirmative statement. I know I know you sent that to me, and I've been kind of mulling that over, looking at other buyer agreements to see, what, if they have that kind of language or not. A buyer, I'm hoping that, we go back, I was kidding with Craig, going back to the part, back to when his dad practiced real estate. And that was, you had a relationship, enough of a relationship with your buyer that you have gone through this thing, you have created this relationship with them contractually and emotionally, physically, the whole bit, so that they wouldn't go and sign another one and be untruthful to the other one. But in the end, the brokerages are gonna have to defend their agreements.
And I don't think it's just, would they be lying about it? Some don't know actually what they're signing. So I had this exact thing yesterday happen, so I'm glad you brought it up. So I had gotten this, buyer from an open house. And she came in for a consult, so I said, are you working with anybody else, that kind of thing, and she said, well, we did write an offer, and we're trying to get it terminated and our money back. It was kind of a dual situation, and they just weren't very happy with that, because that agent now is representing both, and we're trying to get Ernest's money back, so kind of involved. But I said, did you sign anything? Did you sign? We had already signed agency, because I was gonna tell her what I do and information from her. And she says, well, I don't know, there was some electronic things, right? So they don't always understand what they're signing. So then I said, well, this is an EBA. Did you happen to sign? I kind of go through that with her, and she's like, I don't think I did. And I said, well, what you need to do is you need to text that agent right now. And you need to ask her before we go any further with me. Are you in an EBA? Are you wanting to remain in that relationship with that? And she did it right there. So that kind of just right there, and the agent said, no, you did not sign one. Are you wanting to work with someone else? She said, yes, that was that. So,
Yeah, well, there are a couple things, procedurally wrong with that scenario to begin with, right?
right,
A buyer or a seller should know what they're signing.
right,
Right, because if
absolutely.
they do not know what they're signing,
I
if
agree,
they don't
but-
no, I'm
Right,
serious.
yeah.
If they don't understand what they're signing, it can be avoidable contract. I mean, you need to be able to say that your client knows, or your customer at that time, your client at that time knows what they're signing.
Right, and
and
I did that
understands
with
it.
her, yes,
She
but,
also should have had copies of everything that she signed.
and she
right?
was looking for that as well, yeah, yeah,
So we want to make sure of that.
right,
But I think, you all are going to have to take that step back into history, right? Where you sat down with someone on their living room couch, whether or not it's virtually, signing or not. And make sure they understand what they are signing
Right.
at every step of the way. Because if someone says they don't know what they signed, then someone didn't do their job.
And I
Right,
think that
right.
unfortunately happens more often.
right.
Well,
And that's
no,
what I'm saying, I
think it
don't think
does.
it's that they are lying to you, they
Oh.
really, some don't understand, and that's,
yeah.
is a problem.
And hopefully that this weeds out some of that, right?
Right.
Because, we know that is happening. But that's what we're not supposed to be doing to the public, right?
Right,
That's
right.
where the value of you all come. That's where the value of this industry is, protecting them, right?
Right,
And-
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so they may not know, but as a really good agent, you made them check
Right,
before
Right.
you signed it.
Yeah.
And I think you also have that on you, is if you are in doubt that this buyer is in a relationship, contractual relationship with someone, you
Right,
need to make
right.
sure of what's status
Yeah,
they are, right?
absolutely.
And not, you
And-
know, not enticing someone to sign another one just so
Right.
it cancels it out.
Right, and
Right.
double check it, not even just take her word, oh yeah, I told them or whatever, check with that agent. Because again, we don't wanna, there's enough business going around for everyone. We don't wanna step on anyone's toes. And I didn't wanna take a client from someone else, you know? So we're gonna have to do a little bit more work with that, but in the end, it's gonna come out better than not checking.
It shows the professionalism, right?
Right.
I'm making sure that I am treating you as my client, not someone
Right.
else's client.
Scenario wise, let's say I am, I'm licensed in Iowa. And I have a client that was exclusively looking in Iowa, and then all of a sudden says, I would like to look in Illinois. Can they have an EBA with another agent in Illinois as well?
Yes, they can. If you're using that geographic, then not just putting Quad Cities or not just putting, you know, whatever. So on the, our EBA, it, you know, has a location, a locator. So, you can either make it as broad or as narrow as you want.
So then if that other agent is from Illinois, also has maybe an Iowa license, they just can't have them look in the area that I got them in, but maybe expand the Iowa side, I suppose.
They could, as long as it doesn't cross over. Get your Illinois license.
Yes.
Yeah. Quickly.
Yeah, don't chance that scenario because, you know, they can always give you notice then and say they're gonna sign with someone that can show them.
Because I don't
both
wanna
areas.
do them a disservice and say, well, I don't have my Iowa, my Illinois license, but you should still have the opportunity to go see something within your time frame, not mine.
Good question.
And we do have
Yeah, I
one in the
think
chat.
Okay.
Have you had any discussion about how the use of these EVAs is going to be monitored? Am thinking complaints by the public may be one source, but am unsure how long we need to keep these agreements.
Well, your brokerage will know how long they need to keep these agreements because it's the same amount of time that they have to keep listing contracts, purchase agreements and all other transaction papers that are in the transaction. And you need to talk to your broker about that. There has been a little bit of discussion and we do, as the RMLS, because it's the MLSs across the country that are being tasked by NAR to police if you all are using buyer representation agreements. Now, that doesn't seem correct to me, but a lot of the stuff doesn't seem correct to you also. We're gonna live with that. If it's state law, then of course, the Iowa Real Estate Commission and then the Illinois Department of Professional Regulations could be brought into it. Are we going to request having buyer agreements sent to the MLS? We are not. But I did get, it's an interesting idea because we do need to have some procedure to, for compliance, whether or not, we're going to, fine or not, right now, Kendra calls me up and says, well, I just talked to a buyer and they said that so-and-so told them they didn't have to sign this. Right? Right now, my procedure is to call because, we know the truth is always somewhere in the middle of the conversation, right? So I'm going to call the managing broker. I'm going to say, this is what's been reported to me. Can you please find that buyer representation agreement or not, and send it to me. It's going to be by that. One of the other associations, I think it was in Florida, has set up a procedure and I'm not so sure this is a good idea for us to at least put in writing at the end of every month, randomly pick, a number of closed properties, cross-check with showing time, request the buyer agreement, that corresponded to that showing. So I think that probably we will be doing something along those lines. Their fine structure is for the first one, that the brokerage doesn't have, it's $1,500. Second one, the brokerage doesn't have, it's $2,500, and the third one is $10,000. whether or not we fine or not, I think we need to have some kind of a procedure for compliance. So we will be establishing something. Right now, it's you guys' eyes, ears. You see it posted on Facebook that I don't have to do this, I'm not gonna do this, that kind of thing. You let me know, right? Because this is up to me to make sure that we are in compliance with the settlement agreement. If I deem it necessary, I will send it to the Iowa Real Estate Commission, or in January to the Illinois Department of Professional Regulations if it looks like there's just people just not doing it.
I want to bolster that. Please, this is confusing enough. There's enough bad information that is coming from media and whatever. And if we're giving the public mixed messages, that is only going to make things deteriorate in our profession.
Yes.
And so you have a responsibility to let Sharon know if you find out if somebody is not playing the game the right way, if they're not following the rules, because for every person in the public that they touch that they're not doing it, turns all the other agents that people in the public run into liars. It's like, you're lying, you're just trying to make me sign something, blah, 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 because somebody else said I didn't have to. And so please, please, please report those things. Otherwise, our profession will turn into a shambles. And so it's really important to protect what's going on. There's enough confusion already.
Thank you, Mike.
And sometimes, sorry, I'm raising my hand.
Okay.
Okay, sometimes it's just good to call the agent directly. You know, we need to have rapport with each other as well. And maybe just call them and say, hey, you know, is this what actually happened? Because as Sharon said, the truth is sometimes in the middle. You know, they may be telling you, oh no, I didn't have to, when they actually did. So sometimes just calling that agent and saying, hey, you know, this took place. Is this actually what happened? If the agent, you know, says to you, hey, I'm not going to use those, then go to your broker. Let your broker talk to the other broker. You know, we don't always have to turn each other in per se, but we can let our brokers work it out as well.
Yeah, the only thing about that, Lana, is I am tasked with compliance. The brokers aren't, and the other agents aren't. So in this case, I do want to know. And for a while, I think we need to. You know, there are other things, you know, someone leaves the door open, whatever, you know, call each other if you know, see something in the MLS that you don't think is proper and you don't want to turn that in. But this one we are, you know, there have been a number of states that have used buyer representation agreements for years, right? It's been by state law and they have had to do them. So they're not having to figure out this part of it. But we are, and we have had a number of agents in our market that have used them. But overall, what is the reason you haven't used them?
Well, and as I said, they may say they didn't sign anything and nobody told them to, but contact that agent first and ask them. They could easily send you and say, yes, I have a signed EBA right here in my possession. So what I'm saying is, don't always assume the agent didn't do it.
Oh, and that's correct. And I'm not always going to assume it. That's why I'm going to call the broker and we're just going to go through the situation. But, you know, if you wanted to call that agent, that's fine. But why haven't you used an EBA before this?
Convenience.
Oh, well, I think the answer is because not everybody else was, right? No, because everybody else, you know, because it was something that nobody else was doing it. And I didn't want to be that person that was talking to my clients and then lose them to someone that didn't make them. Well, we all need to do it now. So we all know.
Another scenario that I can see happening is if, let's say I have an exclusive buyer representation with a buyer and I have the Quad City area named on the location and I'm showing them houses. And then we end up finding one in Clinton, let's say, and writing the offer, using our awesome new addendum for the compensation. And everything's good, and then we go to closing, and let's say I don't get paid. Because when I turned in my paperwork, it did not include the Clinton area on my buyer representation agreement. Can they refuse to pay me? Or should we just be updating the areas on our buyer agreements and having them initial it?
Well, I would say you should update it because
Right.
it is a brokerage agreement, and if you have something on there that isn't correct, you do make that update. Now, could you argue that, the buyer went outside of that and, I don't know. That's way out of my wheelhouse, right? But I think you always update any brokerage agreement that has a change to it, right? Yeah,
Yes.
Mike,
I also, and this is my understanding, and, that the affirmative duty of not collecting more than what's on the EDA is on that buyer's agent. So it is not on the listing agent to say, hey, give me your EBA and I want to compare it to what I'm offering out and decide if I'm what I'm supposed to be paying you or not. The affirmative duty is on that buyer's agent. If they have an EBA that's less than what's being offered out as co-op compensation, they are prohibited from accepting it. And so if they do, that's a violation. So if you're the listing agent, it is not your job to police that person, and that buyer's agent isn't obligated to share their EDA with you, just like
They are
Here.
not, or are.
They
they are not.
just like you as a buyer's agent don't have a right to see the listing agreement between the listing agent and the seller. You're on the other side of that transaction. If you are the buyer's agent and you collect something more than what's on your EDA, you're in trouble. It's not the listing company that's in trouble for paying you too much.
So who sorts that out? Is that the attorneys, once they have that? Like, are we, like, as a buyer's agent, I'm handing over my EDA to?
No, you should say, what's being,
Right,
presumably, what's being
Right.
offered out. And if your EDA
Doesn't
is
cover
less
that
than that,
amount. Mhm.
you are obligated to say, hey, you can't give me this money. And if you accept it, you're violating the rules.
Yeah, I foresee that, lenders and then closing agents could possibly be, trying to figure out what this is, but yes, in the end, when you turn in your statement, your commission statement, you need to be putting what is on your buyer agreement, if that's. Yeah, you need to be putting on your buyer agreement, right?
That's off what Mike said. That's my biggest confusion, because I hear so many different things when it comes to EBAs and what the compensation the seller may be offering. If for some reason my EBA is lower than what the seller is offering.
Nikki, can
Am
I?
I misunderstanding?
Well, I just want to make sure we're very clear in our language. Co-op compensation is not being offered out by the seller. Co-op compensation is offered out by the listing brokerage.
Okay.
So, but that's a huge distinction, because people talk about it all the time, what the seller's paid. The seller isn't paid. The seller's giving a bucket to the listing agent, and then the listing agent is sharing a portion of that with the buyer's agent.
With the seller's approval.
The seller's knowledge.
With the seller's knowledge. and
The seller's knowledge, right, on the listing contract.
But
Yeah.
it's important to say that, because that's a different payment than if the money is coming from the seller themselves to the buyer's agent.
Okay.
Right, because a buyer's agent can be paid from the listing brokerage, which is traditionally what was advertised on the MLS. It can be paid by the seller directly, historically like a FISBO or something like that. It can be paid by the buyer. You got an EBA and the seller is a FISBO and they're not paying anything. So there's three buckets that the buyer's agent can be paid from. But if it's an offer of co-op compensation, that is coming from the listing brokerage, not from the seller.
Okay, so let me just go through that. Okay, listing, broker to broker compensation.
Yes.
We're talking about that, right?
Mhm.
And broker, the listing broker
Mhm.
is offering A,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
Buyer brokerage is A minus.
Mhm.
Buyer brokerage can only get A minus.
Can the buyer use the excess for closing costs?
No, on our listing contract, it
On your-
specifically states that any excess will go to the listing brokerage.
So that that's based on the listing agreement, not the rules.
Well, no,
Correct.
it's based on the listing agreement,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah,
So because of what Mike said,
Mhm.
your listing agreement is one bucket.
Mhm.
The seller is being notified or being,
Oh,
yeah, notified of what might be happening in that bucket,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Right? So if A minus is coming out of that bucket, it should, the bucket is still going to the listing brokerage. So no matter what is coming out. Now, if your buyer agreement is more than what's being offered, right?
Mhm.
A plus,
Mhm.
thank you.
Mhm.
The plus will be owed by the buyer
Mhm.
unless there comes to an agreement that it is not,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Because, but that would be the buyer brokerage agreement
Mhm.
and, the buyer brokerage figuring that out. Now, in that scenario, right? So here we have A, here we have A minus,
Yes.
right? Buyer broker agreements can be changed. But you're going to your buyer and saying, okay, I don't care about your transaction and I want more, I'm gonna get that more money, so we're gonna change this so I get more money. Whether or not that's a conversation that you wanna have is a whole different
Right.
ball of wax, right? Because I've been asked that question, can we change the buyer agency or the buyer agreement representation agreement to reflect what the compensation offered the buyer brokerage is? And you can, yes, you can, but you're gonna have that conversation with your buyer and whether or not you wanna do that.
Okay. And that is, based on the listing agreement, if there is a listing agreement, not say it's not a physical, so this is a listing agreement. Because of the language that's in the board listing agreement, that is what prohibits that difference to go back to the seller. I mean, if the listing agreement is not used of the boards, that's where the difference.
It's whatever would be in another listing agreement, because it is going to have to, the listing agreement is going to have to reflect what would happen to that part. If the co-op compensation, broker co-op compensation is this,
Mhm.
A, and it doesn't match the
Right.
buyer representation, the listing agreement is going to have to, no matter
Ident-
whose it is, identify what's gonna happen to that, right? Because the buyer has no right to get anything from that listing agreement that isn't designated, or the buyer's agent.
So my question is, so we still, as a listing agent, when the attorneys ask for your commission sheet, you're still putting your brokerage and what the co-op is that your brokerage is offering in that. In the scenario that the buyer's agent does have higher or lower, my commission statement as the listing agent only reflects what our listing agreement states. Correct?
That you're
Yeah,
getting
and
into
it
a
would-
brokerage question now here
Oh, okay,
on commission statements, so,
okay,
yeah.
Just some only say.
Yeah.
They're,
what their side
and
is,
some of it depends on what the closing company is, like,
Yeah.
you get to Clinton.
and that's
they-
fine if it's
They
a brokerage,
write
but.
checks with earnest money and other places they don't, so some of it is.
Yeah,
Deals with local customs and different closing, so that may get a little bit specific based on. the
Yes.
contract, you know, what those-
and the closing agent, may be requesting some of these forms and that kind of thing, to kind of sort it out for a while until they figure it out.
So now on the buyer's agreement, if it was already set as, say, A+. But, A- says the list contract. Listing agreement, and we're fine with taking the A-. Does anything need to be changed on there? As long as it's a lower, I
I,
have to go back and,
any brokerage
that.
agreement, you need to revise to be an accurate reflection.
okay, because we
Right?
heard different on that. Yes, that if it's
Who
less,
who has told you? Your broker has told you you don't have to change it?
I believe only if it was more. Like the difference we were talking about, but if it's a less. Like, right?
I think it was that if we have, when I write an offer. If I have A+ written on my exclusive, on my EBA. I can lower it to match what the listing is, so my people don't have to pay the overage.
Correct,
So
so,
after that offer is accepted, I could do it. We can't raise it after the offer
Correct.
is accepted.
correct, okay, so you would still. Then
The change.
initial it on
Mhm.
there, okay.
Well, I think you always have to make changes on brokerage agreements.
We
to
do
reflect.
have 2 questions.
Okay,
What if someone is covering and showing homes for you while you are on vacation?
For an EBA,
For an EBA is my guess.
I
Well,
did,
yeah, an
Designated.
EBA is a brokerage agreement, so you would just sign an additional or appointed agents. Yeah, I mean, we have that form, to make sure that it's covered.
And the second one, the buyer agreement should have a clause that indicates changes must be in writing, so any changes need to be amended in writing.
that is. 14 modifications of this.
Yeah.
Number 14 for that one.
Mhm.
Those are the questions I have.
Yeah.
I do have another situational question. If you have an EDA signed with a pre-approved buyer and they're sending someone on behalf of them to look at the house. Somebody else that's in town or available when they're not, would you have to sign that buyer agreement with that person?
No.
Because they're on behalf of the buyer?
No, because you would have a buyer representation agreement with the party that is the buyer, the client buyer. I've had that scenario asked me before, and you're not creating a client relationship with them.
I would just, the only caveat I would say is, I would be very careful about those situations because. We've had situations where then the person goes through and the person who's got an EBA with. Says, "Yeah, I'm not interested," but then the person that went through is like, "Oh, I really like this house." Well, now you find it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
just, you just gotta be.
I couldn't get to Lucky's for that.
I think that's where, the video showing,
Yeah.
making sure you have your buyer agreement and doing video showing, always having someone else in. There was a situation, and if you're in the room or online and you were part of the situation, I'm not gonna give details other than, had someone come in, it was gonna be a sight unseen, but they wanted someone to come in because they had specific, very specific, one of them being a bathtub. There was not a bathtub in that house. And that person they brought in did not, I mean, there wasn't a video or anything like that, but that person didn't catch that there was not a bathtub. So, I mean, there are really good reasons not to have, someone else go in and look for things that you want to look at. Sight unseen properties are awful. Yes. Anything else online?
Nope, those are the.
Okay, so now we're gonna switch off of buyer representation agreements. We're gonna talk a little bit about compensation. And it is being removed from the MLS on August 15th. So up until August 15th, you're gonna still see the fields for co-op compensation, for dual variable, and we do have an incentive drop down that nobody uses. There's been like 15 in the entire 2,000 active listings using that, but that's going away also. So there will be no offer. I have been asked every which way how people can get that offer of co-op compensation. The reason, no, I mean, it's no, there's no way in the MLS, but there will be after August 15th in the RMLS, no blanket offer of compensation out of the MLS, right? Your brokerage may be offering a blanket offer of compensation, but it is non-binding. The MLS, since there is no blanket offer anymore, so you're going to, if you call up and you have a buyer that's interested and you call up the listing agent and you find out there is broker to broker compensation, your brokerage is going to have some kind of compensation agreement, right? Just like you would if you went outside of the RMLS. You go into Muscatine and you sell a property in there, you better not be at this point in time thinking that you're going to get paid what's on their MLS. It is not being offered to you. You need to have a compensation agreement. So you are going to have to talk to your broker and see how they are going to treat that. But, if it's on a billboard and they put a house on a billboard and say they're offering such and such amount, that is not binding, right? So if you have an interested buyer and you're gonna write a purchase agreement, you're gonna wanna get a compensation agreement signed.
Prior to you putting in the offer?
I would.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, it would be like a FISBO.
Yeah.
Every deal.
Yeah, every deal is you are binding that, somehow getting an agreement
Okay.
to what you are going to get paid. Which I will tell you, there are other markets, and I've heard, someone has come in from another MLS, expected that, and they've gone to that closing and they get nothing because they did not have an agreement. So you want to make sure you have an agreement, right? So talk to your brokerage about getting a compensation agreement.
Okay, so question, if a buyer agent calls and asks the listing agent what the buyer compensation is there a requirement to share that?
So if there is a broker to broker offer of compensation, yes, a listing agent can't say, I mean, they are working on behalf of the brokerage, that is working on behalf of that seller. Yes, they have to disclose if there is broker to broker compensation.
Right.
But why wouldn't you? What I want to know is in what,
I'm not gonna tell you.
yeah, in what alternate universe do you think keeping that a secret is working for your seller?
I don't think it's working for the seller. I think the problem is people, yes, and people feel if I don't tell you and you have a minus on your EVA and I've written an A+, that I'm going to get the extra. I think that's partly the reason why someone would not want to tell.
Well, they can modify it all the way up to closing, so what would it matter if you told them now or?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can modify your buyer.
Yeah,
You can modify your buyer agreement
Oh.
after you've written an offer.
to match that.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's a
Yeah,
negotiated with your, but you're gonna have to go to
Yeah,
your buyer to
absolutely.
tell them, we're gonna modify this so that I get paid more, right? And whether or not they care or not,
I think most buyers would be like, high five, because it's.
Yeah, but please, don't, we need to not be playing games with our
No,
buyers and
yeah.
sellers,
Right,
right? And
right.
that would be playing a game on your seller for your own gain,
Yes.
right?
That's all I have for.
Okay. So the answer to that is no, you have to tell.
So just as clarification, as far as it pertains to the MLS. you Can't put co-op compensation, it's not a field in it, you can't put it in showing time, you can't put it in associated docs, you can't do it in. Well, your own company could have. An app that says, hey, go just check the app, or the own company could put it on their own website, but couldn't put anybody else's on their own website. That you could put a sign in the yard, you could put a sign at the, along with the documents on the kitchen table and all those things. But as far as it comes, anything tangential to the MLS. No matter how smart you think you are, you can't do it.
Yeah,
I'll find the loophole.
yeah, and I will just tell you that so it's data coming out. So if you are using data that comes out of the RMLS, right? So don't think you're gonna come up with a smart app, or you're not gonna come up with something, because the brokerage that you belong to, if you do that, will be shut down out of the MLS until we investigate and determine who's at fault, why it happened. There will be no tolerance for it. So if you think it's funny to have an embroidered picture with a percentage sign on the chair in a picture on the MLS, your brokerage will be shut down, and you will have to deal with your broker. Or if you are the broker, you are going to have to deal with your agents.
I want to try to say this question right. So we've learned of the compensation, but I think Mike touched on it, or maybe Sharon touched on it. It should be now a written agreement that the broker should sign saying, yep, that's what we're gonna pay.
If
Or-
it's broker to broker compensation.
Okay.
Yes.
But the listing agent, not necessarily the broker, say, yep, this is what you're gonna,
It's whatever your agreement is going to say, your listing agreement right now. Our listing agreements,
Yeah.
our agents allowed to sign the designated agent, the managing brokers on behalf of, it's gonna be by company policy,
okay,
who they want to have making that agreement.
So for instance,
Yeah.
historically, maybe you had a brokerage. Maybe, let's pretend brokerage A, they had a policy that said, hey, within our MLS, there's the offer of co-op compensation, so. But if somebody comes in from outside the MLS, you have to sign a commission agreement with them. And the manager of your office needs to sign off on every single one. That brokerage, when this change happens, may say, oh my God, I'm going to have to sign every single one of these. I am now giving authority to all of my agents that they can sign it on behalf of the brokerage and do it. So does that make sense? I mean,
Yes.
It depends on a broker. I mean, you could have that broker say, nope, that's how I've always done it. And I'm going to sign every single one of these things and bring them across my desk. Well, they're gonna be getting them.
We're hoping they're getting a lot of, right? Because we want lots of listings, lots of sales. But that's 100% a brokerage decision. So
Right.
Craig, you can make your decision.
right.
I have another question. It is my understanding that the buyer, and in this case, using the concessions addendum, a buyer can specify what compensation they will need from the seller regardless of cooperative compensation. Then he says, as buyer representatives, our buyer agreement should reflect what will be needed to compensate the buyer's broker. So I don't understand why we would ask our buyers for more or less.
They're talking in a scenario where there is no co-op, broker to broker compensation. And you're using the addendum for the buyer to be requesting those concession, either traditional concessions or concessions of the buyer broker's compensation from the seller, right? So that is different, because that you're gonna ask, whatever is on your buyer broker agreement, is what you're going to have your buyer be asked. I mean, that's the buyer's obligation, and so that's what they're gonna be asking the seller. So that it's a different situation, yeah.
So in theory, if I had, I think what they're saying is, if I had A+ and the seller or the broker to broker compensation is A-, I could still go to the seller and add it in the, ask that in the.
You
Sure.
could, certainly,
Yeah.
the
The
buyer,
buyer,
the
exactly.
buyer
Sorry,
does,
thank you.
it, the
Yes,
purchase.
yes, yes.
We
The
need to-
buyer,
Yeah.
People are asking.
Yeah, because we have to
Yeah.
remember that the
right,
purchase agreement is between the buyer and the
Mhm.
seller, right?
Mhm.
So and the buyer is asking to pay that additional
right.
amount that they've already agreed to the buyer
Yes.
representation agreement, and you're not gonna lower it, so they're gonna have to ask for it.
Yeah,
correct.
And it's similar to them asking the seller to pay for their appraisal. Or pay for their prepaid year of insurance, or whatever. They're just asking them to pay another obligation they have, which is the difference between A- and A+
Mhm.
to their,
Yeah.
to their agent.
And that's really why we have that nice little addendum now for the purchase agreement, is because it spells out if it's a traditional or if it's for buyer broker compensation, because the lenders are going to want to know what bucket
It goes.
that compensation is going to, right?
Mhm.
Or that ask is, because it'll be classified differently.
So when we're reaching out to the listing agent, we need to start asking them where the compensation is coming from, either from the seller or the brokerage. Oh, that's the, oh,
No, because if it's coming from the seller, you're doing that within the purchase agreement. Your only question is there a broker to broker compensation? If there is not broker to broker compensation, then you need to talk to your buyer about, okay, we're gonna be, let's be asking the seller for this, or how are, are we
Or do you
gonna
have
be?
enough money?
Or do you have enough money to pay me? And you can do that, so, because those are the three ways. Buyer pays it themselves, buyer asks the seller to pay it, or there's a broker to broker. Now, listing agents, right? A lot of the bad press circled around, compensation's gonna lower because, sellers aren't gonna have to offer any compensation and that kind of thing. I think listing agents have to have that real honest conversation with their sellers about, do you want to negotiate now? Do you want to negotiate later? It's that same inspection type thing, right? Do you want to just take care of it here? Because, if you're going to be asked for it here, it's going to become a negotiation. I mean, you're going to have to craft how you're going to deal with your clients. But you also have to be very realistic with them, that if they're gonna, how are you gonna offer it one way or another? And, at what point in time do you want to deal with this, right? Telling them that if they don't offer co-op compensation, nobody's gonna look at their listing is not appropriate conversation, right? Because what is the one thing that lawsuit and the DOJ are accusing real estate practitioners of? Steering. And that's steering, right? Nobody's gonna look at your listing if you don't offer co-op compensation. And I know I have said this now at office meetings, and I said it again last night, and the best way we can prove non-steering, and I don't sell real estate, never has sold real estate, and so it probably not as practical, but you have your buyer and they want to see 10 properties. You make the appointment, you go see those 10 properties. They love the fourth property. It's at that point that you call to see if there's broker to broker compensation. Because if you do it back here and you call all 10 to see if there's broker to broker compensation, who is going to be making the decision on what properties you see? Is it going to be the buyer, or is it going to be you influencing the buyer, right? With your conversation. So if you do that, and you can do that, right? Because the buyer says, well, I don't want to do it any other way, I would get that in writing. Right? Because the last thing we want to do is then have a tester buyer come and pick on an agent and say, I want to see all these properties, find out if they're offering co-op compensation. And you come back and say, well, only, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are, and they say, well, what should I do? And you say, well, let's just see 3, 4, 5, and 6 and see what happens. Right? So make sure that you think through these scenarios before you get yourself into some kind of an issue, because I don't know about in, middle of the country, Midwest, Quad Cities, but there will be people out there looking to see if we are in compliance. The settlement is getting these people this, as opposed to what it could have gotten was this. They're settling because they want something and they don't want to wait forever, and they don't want to have to deal with the costs of, continued litigation, but they're going to be looking. And then we have the elephant in the room, which is the DOJ, and they're always looking, and they don't want co-op compensation at all, broker to broker compensation at all. They want it all to be negotiated between a buyer and a seller, right? So at some point that could disappear, but for right now it's not. But the more they can look at Facebook, and there's that closed Facebook group here. I got a list of people that made comments because people screenshot it to me. You know how many agents that have left the business are making comments on that? So don't tell me it's a closed Facebook, right? They're looking at those comments. They're trying to see what you all are talking about. So just do the business. Just do your business, right? Do the business the way that we all know it should be done, in a professional, ethical manner. Step off my soapbox.
No, say that again.
Don.
Sure. On the broker exclusive right to buy, this talks about the different days, the agreement runs out, they got to pick the 90 days, 20 days, 2 days, whatever. Is there a form now out if you decide to terminate before that, they have signed by the buyers, that buyer's free, I don't want to work with you more, Sharon, you're driving me nuts. Go find her to work with, okay?
Yeah.
Whoever. you-
Yeah, you have so many days,
Right.
you give
If they
notice.
If they want to cancel that earlier, or I want to cancel that earlier, is there a form
No.
to amend it?
So just.
No, you
Right.
just need to give notice.
Just
You just need to give notice. I want you away.
Yeah.
I want you very far away.
In text, in an email.
Yeah, you just have to give notice.
That's what I thought. I wanted
Yeah.
to double check something new.
Yeah, so on that form right now, it says, giving notice at the addresses below, and
Yes.
there's no place for addresses. That addresses below is coming out. On section 11, the first word is buyers. That's the wrong tense. It will go to buyer. So just to let you know that we are just updating that a little bit. No substantive
I saw that. I was like,
changes.
No.
Yeah, where's the address?
Yeah.
See buyers, there may be some buyers that say, when you're doing your consultation, that they only want to see homes that they don't want to pay the fee. They want to only see the homes that are offering compensation to where they don't personally have to pay that. Do we write that in the buyer representation or at that time?
I don't know where you would write that in, but you're missing a way that you can get paid that you don't know whether that exists or not. It's not either the buyer pays it or there's a co-op compensation. The seller and the buyer can negotiate that. So if they're saying that I only want it, co-op because I don't want to pay that, say, but you know what? You find the house of your dreams. You are, as a buyer, are going to try and negotiate that out with the seller, right? In the purchase agreement. So we can't forget that. We can't just think of co-op compensation as the easy button. I'm going to get paid so you don't have to worry about it. You know, there's that middle section that's called the purchase agreement, and that's where it can be.
Yes, thank you. And, I was thinking more along the lines of steering by not showing them a house that we know we can't negotiate. Or,
But you don't, do you know, how do you ever know you can't negotiate, right? You don't know going into any house what the negotiated points are going to be, right? So you can't, you know, asking a listing agent if their seller is gonna negotiate anything, we don't know that until the purchase agreement is negotiated, right? So we want to be very, very certain that buyer understands that if, you know, that the only way that you're gonna get paid is if it's that co-op compensation, broker co-op compensation, because that is not the truth.
In the end,
Yes.
if you think of it's a numbers game for both parties. If
Yeah,
the numbers
it's net
can- if the
sheets and
numbers can
buyer.
Work out, you know, that's kind of our job is to figure that out, you know, what everyone's gonna be happy with in the end. And sometimes it won't work, out, but let's be optimistic and hope it does, so.
Yeah, I mean, as part of the settlement, we're prohibited, even if we get something in writing from our person to, sort by co-op compensation. If you run into that situation, what you can do is say, hey, here are the 12 properties that meet your needs. I've called, this is what each one has said that they are offering out. Provide that to your person, and then they make decisions based off of that,
Mhm.
not a problem. But even if they say, hey, don't show me anything that is offered up, you be in violation, you have to show them everything regardless, and then they let them make decisions.
Yeah,
So on that, I have this question. So the purchase agreement addendum concessions should not be used if there is no offer of cooperation.
You mean broker to broker compensation? It's not used for that.
I don't know where. Can you elaborate on that, Dave?
Unmute.
What I'm saying is let's say that there is no offer of cooperation from the broker. In this case, that does this form purchase agreement addendum for concessions. Does that apply to that? Otherwise, do we have to put it on the offer somewhere else that we want the compensation from the seller?
No, the purchase agreement addendum concession is to be used by the buyer to be asking
Yes.
the seller for concessions, whether or not there are traditional concessions or the buyer broker obligation.
Then I'm confused because it says that they're asking that the seller pay an additional amount of the purchase price. Well, if they're offering nothing, then I suppose we just fill that in as the additional percentage then at that point in time.
Anything over 0 is additional.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. As long as it holds up in court.
If there's broker to broker offer of compensation, and they're not asking for any other concessions, then you wouldn't have to use that addendum. You could use that just for traditional concessions where we used to just put it on page 2. We're just giving you a form to use for all concessions. But the broker to broker compensation, to have it be binding, you need to get something outside. It's outside of the purchase agreement to bind that.
I'm
I'm
sorry,
sorry, I gotta
Yeah.
jump in. Hello from West Des Moines. Hey, I'm gonna lower my hand now. Guys, my name's John Stark, and in addition to being at the DMB for Iowa for EXP, I'm also on the National Association of Realtors Professional Standards, and I really got to jump in on this commission steering question. And I would like to start by saying, holy crap, Sharon knows what she's doing, doesn't she? Oh my God. Any chance you'd move to Des Moines? You guys have got a real gem, and she is deep in the woods in this. The commission steering thing, though, if your buyer says, hey, Dave, I want you to get paid, you're a great guy, only show me houses that will pay me or pay you, you are then engaged in steering. DMB is designated managing broker, Joe. So you're then engaging in steering because you've been asked to steer based on commission. The Department of Justice will swoop down with an FBI SWAT team and take you away if you're caught with that. So as Sharon said, and I want to reiterate this for you guys, so important. You don't know anything until you put it on a purchase agreement and said, I want, or we need, just like closing costs, or how many times have you said seller will not mitigate for radon, and then, oops, they're going to pay for radon. So don't allow yourself to get caught steering based on your compensation, deciding on homes based on your compensation. I would hate to see that come down to one of our NAR committee meetings. So thanks for listening.
So now you've gotten that from me, John, and Mike. So you've heard it 3 times. How many times do you have to hear something to remember it?
Well, if you're a Realtor 21.
I think it's 21, but we've heard it. I think it is.
Yeah, I've said it a few other times.
So there's no point in calling to ask what it might be.
Until after your buyer is.
Not until your buyer has decided on a property.
Right.
And, you know, as a listing agent, do you want that 30 phone calls of
No,
someone
but I
seeing it?
will
you
say,
know?
like, I did like, our broker had said, when you get that appointment, you have the cell phone number that's listed with it. And if you could hold down and just put, if there is an agreement and you want to, you could, as a listing agent, just reply to the showing, broker to broker
Yeah,
compensation is 2.4.
Yeah, you know, my problem
But I
with
guess you're
that,
the
again,
steering, right,
is
right,
what
right.
John and Mike said, right? Then as a listing agent, you
Are
are
you-
party to that
Okay.
steering, right?
Mhm.
Or could be a party to
Could
that
be.
steering because you have sent that out to everyone, you know, letting know whatever that is. So I think, you know, best practice, show them everything they're qualified for, making sure that you have talked with their lender and the lender knows worst case scenario is they pay that. The buyer pays that, right? Or if the buyer can't pay that, then, you know, you're gonna find out that you're gonna have to negotiate or something. But let the system work it out with showing them everything that they're
Yeah,
qualified for, right?
Mhm.
And even those things that, you know, you guys always add in a couple properties that you know that they said that they didn't want, but you know, it's gonna be the perfect house. Do that too. And then see what happens. Okay. Oh, you got another one?
Please raise my.
Oh, Jim.
Oh.
Unmute. Unmute. Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I agree with the gentleman from Des Moines. I think you've done a wonderful job of explaining everything, but I'd like to have a little survey here, as long as we're all here. Raise your hand and say, I am as confused right now as I was when I came into this meeting.
No,
Nobody's confused.
no.
Good, then you're smarter than I am.
Yeah, well, Jen,
Might need a one-on-one
Jen,
with
feel
Jim.
free to give me a call. We'll
Well,
talk.
no, because here's my question. If everything is negotiable and a listing agent takes time to put it on the market, and you want to make sure you don't get into trouble by not showing them houses that no one's paying a commission on. Show them every house, find out which one that they want to buy, and put it in the offer that they want the seller to pay the brokerage this amount. And you have your other backup, your exclusive sellers arrangement that, you know, buyer will have to pay for the difference if we don't get it negotiated out. I think more people are going to be going out and trying to show houses and try to educate the public on how we get paid, and the public could really care less if we get paid. So what we're going to do, that first impression of that husband and wife, when you want to sit down and talk with them realistically and try to explain this to them, it's a hard pill to swallow. I don't know how much enthusiasm a lot of people will have of really going out and presenting the properties that the people want to see, because everybody's so damn confused.
Well, Jim, we'll talk about that. You know, I
Well,
think,
the question is, can you just write it in the offer? Who's paying it? Get it over with. What do you give them the offer? I mean,
you can write it, if the buyer is asking the seller to pay their obligation, you can write that in the purchase, or
Fine.
the buyer can write that in the purchase agreement.
right. So what's the problem?
There is no problem with that.
Okay, so why would anyone need to call me to find out what the commission's gonna be on?
If there's a broker to broker compensation,
Which would be lovely if there is.
Yeah, Jim,
Yeah,
seller is paying the buyer's obligation to the buyer's agent.
per the offer. Per the offer.
Coming from the seller. Co-op compensation does not come from the seller. Co-op compensation comes from the listing broker.
Well, I guess that has to be figured out.
well,
No,
it's in the
that-
listing contract, that's what it is. Yes,
By definition.
yes. Yes,
Well-
and, Sherry, you are right? I mean, that is what the EBA says. It's a learn as you go. Okay, so everybody, you gotta think about this though. First time home buyers, they don't know any different, right?
No, even the buyers that.
Even
that did
even the
20 years
buyers
ago.
that bought 20 years ago.
Mhm.
This is now a requirement. We are you know, it's gonna be all in how you frame it. Script yourself just like you do when you talk to a seller, you know, making sure that they understand this is a relationship agreement. This is, we're going to be doing this together. This is not, you know, trying to pull something, you know, behind someone. This is trying to make sure that both sides are fully aware and transparent on how you guys get paid, but more, what value you bring to the transaction, right? That's the bottom line. And pretty much everybody you sell a house to, I guess, probably works. Right?
And they get paid.
And they expect to get paid for their work, you know, for the value they bring to whatever they are doing. And you are no different, right? So we want to make sure it doesn't, oh, this is something I have to do. This is something that I am creating this is my value proposition. This is the creation of this loyalty, you know, listing contract has always been a loyalty agreement. EBA is a loyalty agreement, right? A non-exclusive buyer agreement is not a loyalty agreement, an EBA is. So anything else, because I'm about
Done sharing.
done sharing. No, you know, I am always available for a phone call. I will still love to come to any of the office meetings, you know, that, or I can virtual in if you know, don't have office meetings. I phoned into one group last night, accidentally, but it was real good. So just, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you all wanting to know, right? And be the ones that are really doing it right and trying to understand, because it is a change. In the early 90s, we changed from sub-agency to appointed and designated agency, and everybody thought the sky was falling. The sky won't fall over this. There's many other things going on in the world the sky may fall over, but it will not be this.
Hey, Sharon. Sharon,
Yes.
John.
Hi.
Hey, I just typed in a little question, but just as in closing, it can be brief, but has anybody got any horror stories or wild stories that have occurred, or bad experiences, or clients that have, you know, refused to sign or anything? What should I look for? And I know we're commercial, but anybody got any crazy stuff that's happened since this policy's been introduced and bad experiences?
Well,
I've
you know,
already,
we had a buyer's expectation, panel, lunch and learn, and, basically, you know, the comment would be, if you don't, you know, this is something that is required, but this is also something that, you know, this is in my practice, I do. And if you don't want to, you know, work with me according to my procedures, then you just need to go work with someone else.
Okay, but I mean, has any of the, have any of the active brokers run into anything yet? Or have they?
Mike?
I've run into a couple of people who have run it by their attorneys who
Mhm.
don't know that the law's been updated and that it's a requirement by law. And so either have said, my person doesn't have to sign this, they never have, you know, we never will, be like, well, okay, well, then they're not going to be able to see any
Good luck.
property. You have to. Or they try to come in and this is how I would draft it. And then you gotta make a decision if that's how you wanna do business, because the way they draft it is, I'm gonna make it completely unenforceable and you will never collect a dime.
Yep,
Would you
they'll,
Yeah. So,
they'll
I
fly
mean,
spec it.
yeah, so there's going to be a little bit of that until people get used to it. There's also gonna be the issue with somebody who looked at a property 3 weeks ago and didn't sign it with somebody, and now they do, they're like, well, what's changed? And so there's gonna be some education. But, you know, it'll come.
Yeah.
So I heard, I think I heard Sharon saying, and this was a follow-up, we had a sales meeting yesterday. And as I was walking, I heard one of the agents say, I won't say whom, but I just want to run it by. He said, well, I'm just going to tell my clients it's the law.
It
Till they
is.
sign it. That, okay, but is that an okay thing to say?
It's not
100%.
Well, in Iowa, it's the law.
It's the law.
Yeah, and then, so Tisha commented too, last weekend, just had it happen where a buyer who told another agent they did not sign anything. I reached out to the other agent, they sent the EBA and they got it all worked out. Also went over all docs with this person. This will just bring back the personalization of real estate, which we were talking about earlier.
Well, but as a buyer's agent, you don't have an obligation to send them your EBA, prove it, right? They have to take your word that yes, you do have one, because you'd never have to send another a brokerage agreement.
Would there be any merit to, having the QCARA drop a letter to the local attorneys or the bar and say, hey, you're going to be seeing this? And this is our standard form, so we don't run into attorneys that are trying to chop it up.
And yes, I will do that. I did for our new purchase agreement, our revised purchase agreement, invite all of the area attorneys, and one showed up. So
Cool.
I'm not really sure that they care. I did have one call and ask what attorney they could call to explain it to them, because they didn't want me explaining it, because I'm not an attorney. So whether or not they will take it from, I will do that. Was that John?
Yeah.
I just say it'd be good.
John.
I just don't want them to get in there.
They're gonna be the non-real estate attorneys.
Yeah.
Do we think NAR will do any commercials on this to educate the public?
No, because there are many states that have had these. So that would just be confusing to those states, right? So no, this is something within our area, but really, the majority of the buyers are not going, if you present that to them, and if they've just looked and they haven't, then, well, the law changed July 1 in Iowa that these are required, but also let's go through it and see how beneficial this is to you. But a lot of buyers are not gonna know the difference.
I don't think
this
they
is
know the
just-
difference, and you still can get out of it. It's
Yeah.
not it's a notice given. It's
Yeah.
not forever and ever, you're tied to me.
Yeah.
If you don't like me, and if I don't like you, great.
Yeah.
Whatever your timeline is,
Mhm.
you can get out of it. It's
Yeah.
not the end all be all. agreement.
Correct. Correct.
I know, our star speaker here has another obligation here, but I just, this is Kendra, the co-chair of the standard, one of the co-chairs of the Standards and Image Committee, and Amanda Yeagy's here as well. First, huge thank you to Sharon. And if you guys did not know, she is a wealth of knowledge and relatively easy to get a hold of too. So, if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Because I think this falls in line where a lot of this is going to be working with each other. Camaraderie and rapport are going to be really important within our industry right now. So just kind of keep that in mind. We're all in the same spot. We all need to work together to get through this and get to the other side. So just always kind of keep that in mind. So.
Yeah, and you're managing brokers or your office managers or mentors or, guru or whoever you have in your office. You need to sit down with them if you have questions about how your office is going to confront this. The association gives you services, we have forms, we can give you, knowledge on what is happening, but your brokerages, that's your first line, right? That's where you need to make sure that they are there for you. Amanda did ask me if I would just put a plug out for the association. This comes out of the Standards and Image Committee, which is a very active committee. If you want to belong, it was the professionalism, but this really is bringing current topics and thoughts and ideas to everyone as a profession. We also have our business professional network, which brings together realtors and business partners, and that's kind of a community outreach more, and our events and those kind of things. So please join in if you want to be a part of the association, and be part of it. Leadership. Until July 15th, we are taking board of director applications. So if you want to be part of the association and part of, what's going on in your industry, feel free to reach out.